Hi, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us today. My name's Phill Anderson, and I'm the Global HR Director here at Briars. So today's session's called Fractional versus Fixed, Scaling Locally, Expanding Globally. And it's a really exciting topic we're going to be talking you through. So this isn't a theoretical HR discussion, far from it. And it's not just about job titles. It's really about how businesses like yourselves are making leadership decisions each and every day in a very different environment to the one we're operating in just a few years ago. So organizations are under tremendous pressure to grow, to remain compliant, move quickly, and support their people wherever they are. While at the same time, let's not forget that, being far more cautious about permanent cost and long-term commitment. So over the next 30 minutes, Gemma and I'll pass over to Gemma in just a little while, we'll walk you through what's changed to the market, why hiring decisions feel harder sometimes than they need to be, and riskier than they used to be, and how organizations and businesses are now combining permanent but also fractional leadership models to stay flexible without losing control. Gemma, over to you for a quick introduction.
Thanks, Phil, and lovely to meet you. Thanks for joining us. My name's Gemma Bignell. I've been with the Briars Group for around 20 years. I'm the Corporate Services Director, and Fractional is something that we've been kind of hotlighting more recently. So we're going to take you through those benefits and when you may or may not want to use it.
Amazing. So let's start with the current market challenge because this concept really underpins everything else we're going to be talking through today. So businesses continue to operate under what you can really appreciate sustained pressure as we move through the early stages of 2026 and obviously beyond. So hiring slower than it used to be. Employment costs are materially higher, and this is a conversation I have on a daily basis. And leadership teams are being asked to deliver more and more, often without that additional headcount. But at the same time, expectations haven't reduced. Boards still expect growth, customers still expect really good delivery, and regulators are still expecting really good, clear compliance. And the data on the screen that Gemma and I have pulled together from the British Chamber of Commerce reflects exactly what we're seeing day to day with our clients. Nearly 3/4 of employers now cite labour costs as their single biggest pressure point. Recruitment difficulties remain widespread, and we're seeing this in conversations we're having with clients up and down the country. And many organisations have reduced investment in things like training, weakening internal capability as well. So this creates a bit of a widening gap between what businesses must deliver and the capacity they actually have internally, which is a real big talking point that me and Gemma will be walking you through on today's session. Next slide, Gemma. So if we really start reflecting and thinking about what's really reshaping our hiring decisions from a HRD perspective, so if I just put my HRD hat on, hiring decisions today are no longer straightforward, and you'll all be a testament to this. So senior HR and finance roles regularly take between 44 and 90 days to fill, so a couple of months at best. The average cost of hiring in the UK now exceeds £23,000 before salaries even paid, which is crazy, isn't it, when you think about that number? And once somebody joins you, the cost becomes fixed. Salary, employer, national insurance, pension contributions, benefits, notice periods, and anything else that you contribute and pay towards somebody's onboarding. And that commitment remains there even if the business changes direction. And that's really the big pressure point here when we're reflecting and thinking about that fixed versus fractional model. And obviously, as a result, hiring shifted from a simple, what you might call resourcing decision into more of a strategic risk decision. And these are conversations that Gemma and I are having with clients on a daily basis. Gemma, next slide.
Okay, so what do we mean by when we talk about fractional and fixed? What are we actually talking about? So fractional is more of the temporary, I suppose, support. It's not the fixed cost. It's maybe not full time. It can be, but it's a little bit more amenable to being provided rather than just that fixed cost that we were talking about. So to provide projects, to think about the strategic directions, more things when you haven't got the capacity to take in something that you need additional support for, or maybe you don't have those resources in-house at that particular point in time. So you're going out for something specific and professional. That's when we would use a fractional side of things. When you're looking at fixed, it's more of that stable part. So you're thinking about it's an ongoing requirement. It's something that's maybe not going to change, and something that you need internally, that support. But it does come at the cost of the full employment. And just to give a bit more bump around the cost differences. So the fractional leadership is, if you think about it, almost like a pay-as-you-go model. So you can hire, from hours to days, whatever you may need, and it can be short-term or it could be long-term, but you're buying in that additional expertise that maybe you don't have in-house to your side. So no risk, none of those employment costs. We're looking at an annual cost there of around 45 to 60,000. Whereas if we think about that same individual on a fixed basis that maybe you wouldn't utilise full time, when you add in the base salary plus all of those employer costs, the risk to the business and the cost to the business is actually much, much higher. So you can use it on that try before you buy. Think about actually maybe you're not really sure if this is a fixed position, and you can actually utilize it from a fractional side instead.
So this is where often people ask which model is better, I suppose. And like I said, me and Gemma have this conversation many times in any given week. And to be honest, the honest answer is neither. They solve very different problems, the fractional versus fixed model. So fractional leadership is often designed for flexibility. It's really flexible. It works best where growth is perhaps uneven, scope's evolving, so you're still thinking stuff through, or maybe just leadership input is required at specific moments in time rather than just continuous. But from a fixed leadership point of view, that's more so designed around that stability piece. It works best where workload's predictable, leadership presence is there and required every day. That's where we really see that fixed model working really well. And issues tend to sort of arise when businesses, hiring managers hire permanently too early or remain sort of fractional after the demand's clearly stabilized. That's something that often we see happens. And I suppose the strongest organizations, the strongest businesses, the real clear decision makers treat leadership resources a bit dynamic, evolving alongside the sort of business itself. And we often see fractional used as a bit of a bridge. Businesses using that fractional model to sort of define what that permanent role should look like actually in the future before that sort of long-term commitment piece. So I think the key takeaway here is, look, there's positives against both models. It's just trying to figure out which one works best for you. So if we just think about when typically you'd use fractional, so if we just look at it a little bit more closely and figure out and sort of explore what works best in practice, fractional leadership is, I suppose, more effective when organizations need experienced judgment in direction, not necessarily 40 hours of leadership capacity a week. But in many cases, the challenge isn't necessarily the volume of work; it's the added complexity it brings. And fractional leadership works particularly well. And where I've seen it work really well is when speed really matters. You really need to get some experience through the door to help you start shaping some decisions and moving things along. So recruiting a senior permanent leader, as you can imagine, could take easily a couple of months. Whereas fractional support can often be dialed in, parachuted in quite quickly, and sometimes it's weeks, sometimes it's days, depending on the sort of individual and experience you're looking for. And we commonly see fractional used during things like rapid growth that we touched on earlier on. International expansion is where it's used a lot. Restructuring or transformational projects, so you need a very clear, explicit set of skills and experience, and you get that person in for a defined period of time. We're probably seeing this more so in light of some of the employment law changes across the UK, but increased compliance risk or regulatory scrutiny. We're seeing that a sort of precursor to looking at fractional models and system implementation. So even in the tech world, we're seeing quite a lot of fractional contracting people now working on very specific implementation projects, and it's working really well. But I suppose a real useful way to think about it is this: if the role didn't exist 6 months ago and the business is still changing, it might be too early to necessarily commit to a permanent hire. Whereas fractional leadership creates that sort of breathing space for you as people leaders, allowing, I suppose, progress against the projects and opportunities you're working around, whether that premature sort of commitment on the permanent hire.
I think that's a really good point, actually, Phil, with the breathing space or on the fractional. So then we come into when to use fixed. When would you want that fixed cost? So if we think about the opposite side, I suppose, to the fractional, so where the demand's really predictable, where you've already done that growth phase, you know really what you need, that is when you would look to hire fixed. When you're confident that actually that investment in cost is required on an ongoing long-term basis. Um, I think from the accountability part, that can be maybe not as clear when we're in a fractional side. So if you're wanting that return and that embedded culture side of things, maybe the fix does apply a little bit better. Not always, but that would be something that maybe you do think need to think about. And quite key on some of these positions, what are they going to be doing? Because I think actually looking at those parts is going to be more attuned to whether you decide to use a fixed individual there. You know, that predictability, the stability, knowing when you really do need that part going forward. So the blended workforce model, so this is really looking at, it doesn't need to be one or the other. It's actually kind of thinking about how you better solution everything that you need. And it's not a one size fits all. You've got all of the options open, and actually using parts of each of them supports your business growth in a far better way. You haven't got all of those sunk costs of bringing permanent employees in. When Phil was saying earlier about the fact that you've grown, you don't necessarily know that that's going to be a long-term requirement. So bringing in the right resources or the right levels, and it could be that you need a senior person that maybe you know you're not going to need in the forward thinking, but right now you really need that expertise. So, you know, use all of the things. And I know we're focusing really on the fractional and fixed, but you know, you have got the outsourced service providers, contractors also that can solution and be part of that blended workforce model. I think we've moved so much away from having just a fixed workforce going forward, that actually taking that step back and going, actually, I need about a third of that person, or I need, but part-time really isn't an option. That's where these sorts of other options can come in and really help you. That scale up and scale down without that high risk. You know, that should really support your growth plans in a far more um, efficient way.
I think that you've hammered on a really good point there. I think I experienced this in a number of different conversations with clients, regardless of the country. I think the blended view of this is certainly where businesses are going now. I think you hammered home the point around, that permanent employee base provides that sort of continuity
Yeah.
and knowledge piece. The fractional leader provides senior expertise, doesn't it, and direction, and that them two work really nice in tandem with one another. But then, yeah, not forgetting the contractor piece. that and the outsource piece that gives you that flexibility that people are after, isn't it? So I suppose that
Absolutely.
the big key takeaway for me is it just sort of allows you to just scale up and down, like you were saying, Jem, without that sort of repeated life cycle of hiring or restructuring, doesn't it? So
It's
it's
the pick and
definitely,
mix.
yeah. No, that's brilliant. Yes, it is. So I suppose this is probably something we can both walk through
Mhm.
the good and the bad when we're talking about fractional support. I think if I just reflect on my own experience, not all fractional support delivers that same great value. Good fractional leadership is often clearly scoped, outcomes focused, and well governed. It needs that to be successful, and that's one of the call outs that me and Gemma typically shout about when we're scoping what that fractional role looks like, and then the clarity on what success looks like, what authority the leader holds, and how progress is measured is a real key point. Because fractional support, it is a cost, so we need to make sure we're getting real added value from the flexibility of that offering. But I suppose poor fractional support is vague, unstructured, and that's where we see it not working when you've not
Yeah,
scoped out actually the reason why you're hiring them in the first place and what you need them to do and by when. That's when we typically see it falling over. And without that governance, I suppose, reporting or clarity on what the role and the opportunity looks like, that value becomes really difficult to see. When actually the fractional model can really add positive value and push on a lot of these project opportunities if you get it right.
yeah. I think if they really have to be seen as part of the team, um, using them just as a interim stand-in isn't good enough. It has to be kind of that conducive, working that culture side of things. That actually still needs to apply to a certain extent. With the fractional, I think if they're left to their own devices, it can actually become a little bit more fractured from a
Yeah,
fractional point of view.
yeah, yeah.
And actually that needs to be, they need to be embedded properly, and make sure that that cadence is really clear.
Yeah, if you get all the good stuff done and you tick all the right boxes and you model it and you sculpt it and you shape it as it should do, it shouldn't feel any different to a permanent
No, it shouldn't.
hire, doesn't it? And that's the big cultural piece you just teased out there. That's really important, isn't it? And when we see fractional leaders support working with businesses, and when we do it ourselves, because me and Gemma, for those who've joined us today, me and Gemma often provide fractional leadership support to a number of different businesses around the world. You know, when we do it right, we are an extension to their business. We understand
Absolutely.
what success looks like. We understand the importance of the scope. We understand the importance of culturally how it lands. So, yeah, I suppose the key takeaway for this slide is making sure you get the scope right, so you can clearly show added value, and making sure that you're working with the right people.
Definitely.
So we've had some pretty great questions from people in advance of this webinar, but also with us today. So I suppose let's start from the top, Jen. So I think if we question when does fractional leadership make more sense than a permanent hire? And we've probably touched on this a little bit, haven't we, Jen? But I
Yeah, I think
suppose
so.
fractional leadership tends to make more sense when a business needs experience and judgment rather than perhaps that full-time capacity piece that Jen was walking us through earlier on. I suppose we probably most commonly see it used when organizations are growing, they're changing, entering something new. So that might be a new market, new country. So that could be, the international expansion space that we talked about a little bit earlier on, increased regulation in a particular country they're already in, system
Yeah,
implementation or organizational structure. That's when we see it working really well. So I suppose in those moments, the challenge usually isn't the volume of work, it's the complexity of the decision making. And that's where that fractional model
yeah.
really works well, doesn't it, Jem?
It's that senior side, and knowing that it's the right skills that you're bringing in, but it might just be that short-term requirement rather than long-term. But yeah, let's not confuse this with temporary workers. Fractional is very different from that side of things.
Yeah, it ultimately allows businesses to access, like you say, really senior people quickly without locking in that permanent cost before, I suppose, the long term shape of the role is fully understood, isn't it? And
Yeah.
that's basically what that is. Good. Question two,
So,
Jem. So, how do we decide which roles should be fractional versus permanent?
well, I think this comes down to really thinking about what the requirements are. If we were to use our previous slides almost as that checklist of, you know, is it a short term need? Is it a long term? Are we sure that it's an ongoing requirement? Um, is it more project stuff and maybe we don't need those skills going in the forward? I think those are kind of those key decisions around where do we sit it. However, I do also think that fractional is quite a good solution for when you are looking for that permanent hire because you then get that infill of support when you need it. And actually, that may help you to shape what that permanent hire then looks like because you're working it through and going, actually, maybe that's not the skill I need. Maybe I need something a little bit different. And it will tease that out a little bit more and help you make a better decision going forward.
Love that. And I've literally just had this question asked of me this morning with a client who's looking to expand into the
Hmm.
UK. I suppose coming back to what you just said there, Jem, the importance of the questions, the three tests, if you
Yeah.
like. So I think first and foremost, is that workload consistent throughout the year, or does it peak at certain times or during certain events or projects? Is the second question, is the role primarily strategic, which is your point, Jem? So
Yeah.
strategic or heavily operational day to day, question mark, is something that we typically explore. And I suppose thirdly, um, and probably most importantly, is the operating model stable or is it still evolving? I think that's one of the key questions we ask when we're exploring the fractional model with a number of our sort of existing clients, but people who are looking to do it as well. So I think where
Hmm.
workload is sort of uneven, initiative driven, or linked to change, that fractional leadership piece often fits better.
Yeah, I agree. Totally.
Next question, James. So, can fractional leadership transition into a permanent role? I think,
Wow.
I think the short answer is probably yes. And
Yes,
that and in
I'd agree with
in
that.
many cases, that's exactly how clients use it. Oh, that's been my experience, Jamie.
Yeah. Yeah. There's usually a kind of trail plan of actually, well, maybe we didn't need it to begin with, but now actually we really like it and actually we'd like to keep it. And that we kind of, you work that through with the clients. And then it is kind of a talk through of do you then go and hire permanently or do you retain the fractional, but just maybe on a higher level or more time?
Yeah, we've seen both, haven't we?
Yeah,
I
we
think we've seen
have.
people use it as it's almost like a stepping stone to permanent hiring, but we've also seen people who go, "Do you want this really works for me? I love the flexibility of it, and let's
Yes.
not hire directly and just keep the fractional um, person." But I suppose that fractional leadership piece, it does give businesses like yourselves the opportunity to sort of define the role properly, understand what the true workload looks like, and see what actually good looks like is the big thing.
Hmm.
Touching back on Jem's earlier point on the cultural side before recruiting that full time hire, and then I suppose last point from me on this one is rather than hiring based on assumptions, which we've experienced
Yeah.
some of the people we've spoken to previously do, you can actually hire based on that lived experience of somebody who's been there and done it and supported you through it, which clearly significantly reduces that risk piece as well, that miss hire risk more specifically. So I think in
Yeah.
summary, yes is the answer, isn't it, Jem?
It is. It is.
And then is fractional leadership just a cheaper alternative to permanent hiring? I'm saying a big fat no on this one, Jem. And I think that's a really important distinction. I think fractional leadership isn't about cost cutting by any sense or replacing permanent roles with cheaper labor. It comes back to the point you made earlier on, Gemma, about that sort of deploying senior experience differently. I think the
Yeah.
value comes from across. The value comes from access to that judgment, the insight, the decision making, that strategic piece you were talking about earlier on, not from reducing that salary cost, which I think this question's trying to get. And I suppose when fractional is treated purely as a cheaper option, it probably doesn't give you the right outcomes, but what you need either, does it? So I think that's where I am, Joe. I think this one's a no.
Yeah, I agree. And I think so. I think the team may have slid you a separate question to what's on the slides. So just to cover off the last one on the slide, we've got what are the biggest mistakes when choosing between fractional and fixed? And I think when we think about that, it's the getting the scope wrong. It's jumping in to fixed maybe too quickly, even fractional too quickly sometimes, and just getting that, not doing that planning, and really looking at what that scope looks like. Who are they going to report into? What are the deliverables of this piece, and having that clearly defined. And I do think that actually goes on fractional and fixed, making that decision. And when you choose to go fixed, if you are hiring, that cost is sunk. You get it wrong, it's going to cost. Whereas from the fractional side of things, it is kind of back to that try before you buy, and experiencing it first.
It looks like I have got more questions, Jem. Why are they all sending
Have
them to
you?
me? I've got
Ah,
two more. I've got two more questions. Two more questions. Two more
excellent. Let's go.
questions. Is fractional leadership only suitable for small or growing businesses? And I would say absolutely not at all.
No,
Me and Gemma
definitely
work
not.
with organizations of all sizes, including mature businesses and international ones. Larger organizations often use fractional leadership for the transformation programs that we talked about earlier on. Excuse me. System change, market entry. I think that's where we probably see the differences. But even very established businesses,
Larger
um,
businesses, it's just as key, especially if you're
exactly,
going through a
exactly.
change program, or they're suddenly getting ready for investment. So when we're starting to see that, that's when usually there is a requirement for the skill set that maybe doesn't exist, or actually more the fact that you won't have capacity within the existing team. They're already stretched, they're already trying to do something. The fractional will allow you that breathing space to actually deliver around maybe it is tidying up and doing that, just ready for those investors to come in.
And I think that segues nicely into the last question I've got, Jem, which is
Okay.
how quickly can fractional support be put in place? And I think they
Oh,
had
crikey.
typically much faster than a permanent hire.
Yeah,
I would
definitely.
say. So, I mean, while I suppose senior level, strategic level, permanent hires can take months, depending on the seniority of the role. Fractional support can have to be deployed in weeks. I've seen it in
Maybe
days
in
once you get the
hours.
right person. Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah. But come back to your point around parachuting into a particular nuanced and complex project piece with a
Yeah,
client, sometimes they need that. Hey, I need some boots on the ground ASAP. I need some experience. I need some knowledge. So it can be dialed up as quickly um, as you possibly need it, really. I suppose the
yeah, and
key
I
is
think
just
actually that's
making
the key point. If you're parachuting in, you don't necessarily need somebody to parachute in at that full run rate that they're then gonna get to. It can be a little bit more sporadic to begin with, and that it also comes down to the flexibility of the fractional side.
love it.
Okay, so our summary of key takeaways then. Um, we won't necessarily read these through, but let's just think about the decisions carry the greater cost, and risk. We've already seen the changes in the employment legislation, how that might affect you going forward. And then with regards to the flexibility, speed, I don't think Phil and I could be clearer on how much that it is horses for courses, and it will be not necessarily right for everyone, but it is definitely right in the right sense. And obviously, you know, scope that out, think about it, and then make the decision as to whether you want to go fractional or fixed. or a hybrid?
Yeah, which we typically see the case, don't we, Jen? We usually see a mixture of the mixture of the few, don't we? Amazing. So I think from a Briar's point of view, we support organizations globally, locally with fractional HR and finance leadership from both director level throughout to operational delivery. So we help businesses assess where you are today, what challenges sit ahead and you need support with, what leadership support will create the biggest and I suppose greatest impact for you at each and every stage. And me and Jem specifically work as part of your team, not as a sort of external bolt on. Coming back to some of the points that Jem made earlier on, and everything that we do is always backed by structure, and we've talked around the
Mhm.
importance of that governance. Again, we've talked around the compliance side earlier on in the presentation, and reducing risk and just making sure you've got really great continuity. So I suppose if today's sessions resonated with you well and you'd like to explore whether fractional leadership could support your business, contact details will be on the screen now. But yeah, from me and Gemma, really enjoyed the session. Thank you very much for your questions. Hope we've answered them as well as you would have hoped. And great to see you.
Thank you very much all.
Take care.